The Valkorian Empire had conquered 1,700 worlds across 4 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their fleets darkened the skies of 1,000 civilizations. Their armies had crushed species that once dreamed of touching the stars. For 12,000 years, they had known nothing but victory, their name synonymous with inevitable conquest. Admiral Keth Voronezh stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Sovereign, flagship of the Third Expansion Fleet. Before him, displayed on the holographic tactical screen, hung a small blue marble of a world, the third planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in what the locals apparently called the Milky Way. Earth, he said, tasting the alien word. Such a simple name for our next acquisition. His second-in-command, Fleet Commander Yira Salveth, pulled up the intelligence reports. Pre-warp civilization, Admiral. They have achieved basic spaceflight, primitive chemical rockets, a few orbital stations. Their military technology is centuries behind our most outdated weapons. Ground-based projectile weapons, crude nuclear devices, atmospheric aircraft. They have no energy shields, no faster-than-light capability, no understanding of subspace mechanics. Voronezh allowed himself a thin smile. A collection world, then. Their resources will fuel our expansion into this sector. The population is approximately 8 billion, Salveth continued. Divided into nearly 200 nation-states, many of which are in conflict with one another, they appear to spend significant resources fighting among themselves. Primitive and fractured, Voronezh nodded. They will fall within hours. Signal the fleet, standard planetary subjugation protocol. Disable their orbital assets, eliminate any military resistance, then begin ground operations. I want this world secured before the next cycle. The invasion fleet numbered 3,000 vessels, battle cruisers, carriers, troop transports, and support craft. It was considered a modest force by Valkorian standards, more than sufficient for a pre-warp civilization. As they entered the solar system, passing the outer gas giants, they detected the primitive probes humanity had sent into the void. Curiosity drove Voronezh to have one of them captured and analyzed. It contains a golden disk, the science officer reported, puzzlement evident in his voice. Audio recordings, images, mathematical formulas. It appears to be a greeting, a message of peace and welcome to anyone who might find it. Laughter rippled through the command deck. The notion that anyone would send greetings into the void, hoping for friendly contact, struck them as naive beyond measure. Destroy it, Voronezh ordered. We have no use for sentimentality. As the fleet approached Earth, they began intercepting the planet's electromagnetic transmissions, radio signals, television broadcasts, digital communications. Intelligence officers worked to decode and translate them, building a picture of the species they were about to subjugate. Fascinating creatures, Salveth murmured, watching a translated news broadcast. They seem obsessed with their own conflicts. Wars, political disputes, economic struggles. They barely look upward at all. All the easier for us, Voronezh replied. What the intelligence officers failed to fully appreciate in their haste to catalog human weaknesses was the content of certain other transmissions. Scientific papers discussing theoretical physics, engineering documents outlining ambitious projects, military communications encoded with encryption that, while breakable, spoke to a sophistication beyond mere projectile weapons. And buried in the noise of human civilization, quiet signals from facilities that didn't appear on any public map. The fleet entered Earth orbit at 14:32 Greenwich Mean Time on what humans would later remember as the most significant day in their history. 3,000 alien warships materialized from behind the moon, their presence announced by the sudden failure of every satellite in orbit as directed energy weapons systematically eliminated humanity's eyes in the sky. Across the planet, chaos erupted. Military installations went to high alert. Politicians scrambled for information. Citizens looked up at the sky, where the alien vessels were now visible as points of light moving in formation. Admiral Voronezh broadcast his message across all frequencies, translated into the major human languages by the fleet's linguistic processors. People of Earth, I am Admiral Keth Voronezh of the Valkorian Empire. Your world now belongs to us. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Surrender your governments, your militaries, your resources, and you will be permitted to live as subjects of the empire. You have one of your hours to comply." The message ended. Voronezh settled back in his command chair, fully expecting the usual response: panic, desperate attempts at negotiation, perhaps a few futile military strikes that would be swatted aside like insects. He had seen it 100 times before. What he got was silence. For 47 minutes, humanity said nothing. No response came from any government, any military installation, any broadcast station. The planet below continued its routine as if the fleet didn't exist. People still drove to work, children still went to school, broadcasts continued their scheduled programming. "Are they deaf?" Solvith asked, genuinely confused. "Do they not understand the situation?" "Perhaps they are paralyzed by fear," another officer suggested. "Some species simply cannot process the reality of their conquest." At the 48-minute mark, a single transmission originated from Earth. It came from a facility in the mountains of a region called Colorado, from a man who identified himself as General William Hayes, speaking on behalf of something called the United Earth Defense Council, an organization that apparently didn't exist in any of their intelligence reports. "Admiral Voronezh," the human said. His voice was calm, measured, without a trace of the fear Voronezh expected. "Thank you for your ultimatum. We have discussed your proposal and must respectfully decline. Earth will not surrender. Furthermore, we advise you to withdraw your fleet immediately. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. For a long moment the command deck was silent. Then laughter erupted, genuine, disbelieving laughter from officers who had witnessed the fall of spacefaring empires. "They warned us," Solvith gasped between laughs. "A pre-warp civilization warned us to withdraw." Voronezh was not laughing. Something in the human's voice and the absolute certainty of his tone triggered an instinct that had kept Voronezh alive through countless campaigns, but he pushed it aside. The humans had no weapons that could threaten his fleet. Their bravado was merely the denial of a doomed species. "Begin the assault," he ordered. "Target their major military installations first. Show them what happens to those who refuse the empire." The fleet's weapons charged. Energy beams lanced down toward the planet, targeting the coordinates of major military bases around the world. At the speed of light, destruction raced toward Earth. And then something impossible happened. The beams stopped. Not dissipated, not deflected, stopped, frozen in space approximately 200 kilometers above the planet's surface. They hung there like suspended lightning, their energy contained within some kind of barrier that hadn't existed a moment before. "Report," Voronezh snapped, rising from his chair. "I don't understand, Admiral," the weapons officer stammered. "Our beams are being absorbed by something, some kind of energy field. It's not deflecting our weapons, it's consuming them. The energy readings are impossible. This technology is beyond anything we've ever encountered." Before Voronezh could respond, the tactical display lit up with new contacts. Objects were rising from Earth's surface, thousands of them, accelerating at rates that defied the laws of physics as the Valkorians understood them. In seconds, they had cleared the atmosphere and were taking up positions around the planet. "Those aren't the chemical rockets we detected," Solvith whispered, her amusement gone. "Those are. I don't know what those are." The human vessels were elegant in a way that Valkorian ships were not, sleek, almost organic in their curves, and absolutely bristling with what even a casual observer could recognize as weapon systems. They outnumbered the invasion fleet 10-1, and more were still launching. A new transmission arrived. The same voice, General Hayes, but now with an edge of something that might have been satisfaction. "Admiral Voronezh, you seem surprised. Did you really think a species would reach into the void, hoping to find friends among the stars without preparing for the possibility of finding enemies instead? We've been watching your empire for quite some time. We know exactly who you are and what you do, and we have been waiting for you." Voronezh found his voice. "This is impossible. Our scouts reported you were pre-warp. You had no advanced technology. Your scouts saw what we wanted them to see. We detected your probes entering our solar system years ago. We've been watching your communications, studying your technology, learning your tactics. And yes, most of our population genuinely has no idea about any of this. We kept our preparations secret even from our own people. We didn't want to cause panic, and we knew that a species that appeared divided and helpless would be far more tempting target than one that was ready for war. You baited us, Voronezh breathed. We invited you. There's a difference. You see, Admiral, humanity has a peculiar trait. We're very good at fighting each other, yes. We've spent our entire history perfecting the art of war. Every technological advancement we've made has been driven, at least in part, by our desire to find more efficient ways to kill one another. But here's the thing about all that practice. It means that when a real enemy appears, an external threat, we're extraordinarily well prepared. On the tactical display, the human fleet had completed its deployment. The Valkorian ships were completely surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned by technology that shouldn't exist. Your hour is up, Admiral, Hayes continued. But I'm a reasonable man. I'll extend you the same courtesy you extended to us. Surrender your fleet, your weapons, your technology, and your navigation data, and we will permit you to live. You have 1 minute to comply. Voronezh's mind raced. Retreat was not an option. The human ships had positioned themselves to cut off any escape vector to the system's edge where FTL travel was possible. Fighting was equally impossible against such overwhelming force, but surrender. The Valkorian Empire did not surrender. In 12,000 years, no admiral had ever surrendered a fleet. I cannot surrender, Voronezh said, and for the first time there was something like fear in his voice. The Empire does not permit it. If I surrender, my entire bloodline will be executed. Every member of my crew's families will be enslaved. You don't understand what you're asking. There was a pause. When Hayes spoke again, his voice had changed, softer but somehow more terrible. I understand perfectly, Admiral. Your empire rules through fear, through the threat of consequences so terrible that no one dares to defy them. Your people don't serve out of loyalty or belief. They serve because the alternative is unthinkable. Another pause. We've seen that before. We've done that before to ourselves. And we've learned that such empires have a critical weakness. What weakness? They exist only as long as the fear remains. Remove the source of that fear and they collapse under their own weight. Voronezh felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the command deck. What are you saying? I'm saying, Admiral, that your empire has just made the last mistake it will ever make. You came here to conquer us. Instead, you've given us something we've been waiting for, a reason to come out into the galaxy. We were content to stay here, to develop our technology in secret, to watch and wait. But you've shown us that the galaxy is ruled by slavers and conquerors, and humanity will not stand for that. You can't threaten the Empire, Voronezh said, but his voice lacked conviction. We rule 1,700 worlds. We have millions of ships, trillions of soldiers. You have numbers. We have something better. Hayes's voice hardened. You have 30 seconds remaining, Admiral. I strongly suggest you use them wisely. Surrender and you and your crews will be treated as prisoners of war under our conventions, with dignity, with rights, with the possibility of eventual release. Refuse, and we will demonstrate exactly what humanity is capable of when we stop holding back. Voronezh looked at his command crew. He saw fear in their eyes, real fear, perhaps for the first time in their careers. These were hardened warriors who had conquered worlds, and they were terrified of a species they had dismissed as primitives mere hours ago. If I surrender, he said slowly, and you truly mean what you say about treatment, about rights, will you protect my crew's families from the Empire's retribution? Admiral, after today, there won't be an Empire to carry out retribution. I give you my word. Voronezh closed his eyes. In 12,000 years, no admiral had surrendered. But in 12,000 years, no admiral had faced anything like this. The third expansion fleet surrenders, he said quietly. We yield to human forces. The words were transmitted across all channels. On 3,000 Valkorian ships, weapons powered down. Across the human fleet, there was no celebration, only grim efficiency as boarding parties prepared to take control of the surrendered vessels. General Hayes watched from Earth Command as the operation proceeded. Beside him stood Dr. Catherine Morris, chief architect of the planetary defense grid, and Admiral Kevin Park, commander of the newly revealed United Earth Navy. That went better than expected, Morris said quietly. I half thought they'd fight despite the odds. Their psychology is predictable, Hayes replied. 12,000 years of conquest have made them complacent. They've never encountered real resistance. They don't know how to handle it. Park was studying the captured navigation data already being transmitted from the Valkorian flagship. Their homeworld is about 400 light-years away, 1,700 occupied worlds, most of them running on skeleton garrisons because they've never needed more. He looked up at Hayes. "Sir, are we really doing this?" "We are." Hayes turned to face the tactical display, which now showed not just Earth's solar system but the entire spiral arm, Valkorian territory highlighted in red, occupied worlds in yellow, their homeworld in black. 70 years ago, we detected their first scout probe entering our system. 70 years of secret development, of hidden facilities, of technology that would make our public science look like cave paintings. We knew this day would come. "The public is going to have questions," Morris said. "A lot of questions. They'll get answers after we've secured the situation." Hayes touched a control, opening a channel to the global leadership network. Presidents, prime ministers, generals, all waiting in various secure bunkers for the news they'd been promised would come someday. "Ladies and gentlemen, Phase 1 is complete. The alien invasion has been neutralized without a single human casualty. I'm now initiating Phase 2. Phase 2. The President of the United States, Daniel Cooper, sounded exhausted. He'd been briefed on the existence of the Defense Council only 6 hours ago when the alien fleet was first detected. "You said Phase 1 was defense. What's Phase 2? Liberation." Hayes brought up the galactic map on every secure screen. "The Valkorian Empire has enslaved over 1,000 species across 1,700 worlds. That ends now." "General," the Chinese premier Wei Lin cut in, "are you suggesting we invade an interstellar empire?" "I'm suggesting we end one. Not through invasion, we don't have the numbers for that, but we have something better." Hayes nodded to Morris. "The Cascade Protocol," Morris began. "For the past 30 years, we've been developing a weapons system that doesn't target ships or soldiers. It targets infrastructure. Every Valkorian ship, every communication relay, every orbital platform runs on the same core technology, a crystalline power matrix that's been unchanged for 8,000 years, efficient, reliable, and catastrophically vulnerable to a specific subspace frequency." "You can destroy their technology," Cooper said slowly. "Simultaneously, every power matrix in the Empire overloading at the same moment. Their ships will go dark. Their weapons will fail. Their communication network will collapse. 1,700 worlds will be free in an instant." "And then what?" the Russian President Nikolai Petrov asked. "We leave over 1,000 species to sort things out themselves after millennia of occupation." "No," Hayes's voice was firm. "We help them. Our fleet can reach any point in the former empire within days. We provide aid, we help them rebuild, we defend them from whatever warlords try to fill the power vacuum. We don't conquer them, we lift them up." "And the Valkorians themselves?" Premier Lin asked. "Their civilization is about to collapse. Not through genocide, we're not monsters, but their entire society is built on the infrastructure we're about to destroy. They'll be reduced to their homeworld, dependent on species they once enslaved for basic survival. They'll have to learn a new way of existing." Hayes paused. "History has taught us that empires built on cruelty eventually fall. We're just accelerating the timeline." The world leaders were silent, absorbing the implications. Finally, Cooper spoke. "General, you're talking about reshaping the galaxy." "Yes, Mr. President, I am. The question is, do we have the courage to do it?" In the detention area of the captured flagship, Admiral Vorony sat in a cell that was, he had to admit, more comfortable than many of the quarters he'd provided to high-value prisoners over the years. A human officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Jennifer Price, had brought him food and water and treated him with a courtesy he hadn't expected. "You seem troubled," he said to her during one of her visits. "I am your enemy. Why do you treat me with kindness?" Price considered the question. "Because you're a person. You made bad choices, served a bad cause, but you're still a person. Treating you poorly wouldn't undo the things you've done. It would just make us more like you. That is not how the Empire handles such matters." "I know." She paused at the door. "That's kind of the point. Hours later, Voronezh felt it, a shudder through the fabric of reality itself, a pulse of energy that made every cell in his body vibrate. And then, on the display screen that the humans had left active in his cell, he watched the galactic map update in real time. 1,700 red dots representing Valkorian-controlled worlds flickered. One by one, they went dark. Communication relays failed. Fleet positions disappeared. The entire infrastructure of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known collapsed in a wave spreading outward from Earth at faster than light speeds. The Cascade Protocol. Voronezh watched his civilization die, and he felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He felt relief. Relief that the weight of empire, the constant fear, the endless cruelty, was finally being lifted from the galaxy. He had served the empire because he had no choice, because everyone served the empire. But he had never believed in it. None of them had, not really. They had simply been too afraid to imagine any alternative. Now the humans were providing one. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy transformed. Human ships arrived at occupied world after occupied world, not as conquerors but as liberators. They brought food, medicine, technology, and something far more valuable: hope. Species that had known nothing but servitude for generations looked up at the sky and saw not the warships of their oppressors, but the vessels of a species that asked nothing in return for its help. Not everyone trusted them, of course. Millennia of oppression had taught many to be suspicious of any offer of aid, but the humans were patient. They learned languages, studied cultures, adapted their approach to each world's unique circumstances, and slowly, trust began to build. Dr. Nathan Burke was part of the first humanitarian team to reach Velkoth Prime, a world whose native population had been enslaved for mining operations for over 6,000 years. The Velkothi were small, six-limbed beings with silvery skin and large, dark eyes that had adapted to generations of underground labor. "They don't know what freedom is," Burke reported back to Earth. "Literally. They don't have a word for it in their language anymore. The Valkorians erased it." "Then we'll help them find it again," Hayes replied. "Take your time. This isn't a mission with a deadline. This is a commitment." Burke spent 3 years on Velkoth Prime. He learned their history, helped them recover records that the Valkorians had tried to destroy, and watched as a new generation grew up knowing that the sky belonged to them, not to their oppressors. When he finally left, the Velkothi elder who had become his closest friend pressed a small crystal into his hand. "This is a memory stone," she explained. "It holds the story of our liberation. Every Velkothi who touches it will know what humanity did for us. We will never forget." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Thuros IV, human engineers helped rebuild cities that had been stripped for resources. On the water world of Neala, marine biologists worked with the native aquatic species to restore ecosystems that had been devastated by Valkorian industrial practices. On 100 worlds, the story was the same. Humans arriving not with weapons drawn but with hands extended. The Valkorians themselves posed a unique challenge. Their homeworld, Valkoria, had been the heart of an empire, and now it was just another planet, its population struggling to survive without the resources they had stolen from others for millennia. Some called for punishment, for retribution, for making the Valkorians suffer as they had made others suffer. Hayes refused. "Collective punishment creates collective resentment," he said in his address to the newly formed Galactic Council, the first interspecies government in history. The Valkorian people were victims of their own system as much as anyone else. They lived in fear, they served because they had no choice, and most of them never personally harmed anyone. "We will not punish children for the sins of their ancestors." Instead, humanity offered help. Food aid prevented mass starvation. Medical teams treated diseases that the Valkorian healthcare system, designed for an elite few, had never addressed for the general population. Engineers helped rebuild infrastructure using technology that didn't depend on the stolen resources of other worlds. And slowly, impossibly, Valkorian society began to change. Without the apparatus of empire, without the constant propaganda about racial superiority and manifest destiny, a new generation began to question everything their parents had believed. They learned the true history of their civilization, Not the glorious conquest narrative, but the reality of suffering, exploitation, and cruelty. And many of them chose a different path. Admiral Voronezh, released after 5 years as a prisoner of war, became an unlikely advocate for this transformation. He traveled across Valkorian space, speaking to crowds of his own people about what he had witnessed. "I was prepared to die rather than surrender," he told them. "The Empire taught me that surrender was the ultimate dishonor, but the humans showed me something else. They showed me that strength without compassion is just cruelty. That power without responsibility is just tyranny. They could have destroyed us. Instead, they helped us." Because they understood something our empire never did, that the true measure of a civilization is not how it treats its enemies, but how it treats those who can do nothing for it in return. Not everyone listened. There were those who clung to the old ways, who dreamed of rebuilding the empire, who saw humanity's mercy as weakness to be exploited. They formed resistance cells, launched attacks, tried to destabilize the new order. They failed. Not because humanity crushed them with overwhelming force, but because their own people turned against them. The Valkorian population, finally free to speak without fear, rejected the ideology of empire. They had seen what it cost, what it demanded, what it destroyed. They wanted no part of it. 10 years after the invasion that changed everything, General Hayes, now President Hayes of the United Earth Federation, stood before the Galactic Council to deliver the anniversary address. Representatives of over 1,000 species filled the Great Assembly Hall on the neutral world of Concordia, chosen specifically because it had never been touched by Valkorian occupation. 10 years ago, he began, an empire came to Earth believing they would find an easy conquest. They found something else instead. They found a species that had spent its entire history preparing for war and had learned through bitter experience that war is something to be avoided whenever possible and ended as quickly as possible when it cannot be avoided. He paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. So many species, so many histories, so many stories of suffering and survival. We could have destroyed the Valkorian Empire and taken its place. We had the power. Some of our own people urged us to do exactly that, to become the new rulers of the galaxy, to dictate terms to every other species from a position of absolute strength. We refused. Not because we are saints. Humanity's history is full of our own empires, our own conquests, our own cruelties. We have oppressed and exploited and destroyed. We know better than most the seductive nature of power and the corrupting influence of unchecked authority. We refused because we learned something that the Valkorians never did. We learned that true strength is not about domination. It's about building something that others want to be part of. That lasting peace comes not from forcing others to submit, but from creating a community where submission is unnecessary. That the measure of a civilization is not the worlds it conquers, but the lives it improves. He raised his hand, gesturing to the assembled council. This is what we choose to build. Not an empire, but a community. Not subjects, but partners. Not a hierarchy of species with one on top and all others below, but a coalition of equals, each contributing what they can, each receiving what they need. The Valkorian Empire lasted 12,000 years. It ruled through fear, and it fell in a single day. This council, this community we are building together will last longer. Not because we enforce it with weapons, but because every species here chooses to be part of it. Not because we demand obedience, but because we offer something better than obedience, belonging. The applause began slowly, then built until the great hall echoed with it. Species that had never met before this decade, species that had been enemies under Valkorian rule, stood together and celebrated not a victory, but a beginning. Later, in a quiet moment on the observation deck of the diplomatic station, Hayes stood with Voronezh. The former admiral had become an unlikely friend over the years, a symbol of the possibility of change and redemption. "Do you ever regret it?" Voronezh asked. "All of this could have been yours. Humanity could rule the galaxy." Hayes shook his head. "We learned a long time ago that ruling others is more trouble than it's worth. The British learned it. The Romans learned it. The Soviets learned it. Every empire in human history eventually discovered that the cost of maintaining control exceeds the benefits of possession. We decided to skip that part and go straight to cooperation. Your people are remarkable, Voronezh said. You had every reason to be cruel, and you chose kindness. You had every opportunity to dominate, and you chose partnership. I spent my entire life serving an empire built on fear, and in 10 years, you've built something better through compassion alone. Not compassion alone, Hayes corrected gently. We still have the largest fleet in the galaxy. We can still fight if we have to. The difference is that we choose not to unless there's no alternative. Strength without the wisdom to use it responsibly is just destructive power, but strength combined with restraint, that's the foundation of real peace. Voronezh nodded slowly. You know, when I first surrendered, I expected to be executed, or at worst kept as a trophy, a symbol of human victory. Instead, you treated me as a person. You listened to me. You even let me go, knowing I could have tried to rebuild the empire. Would you have? No, the admission came easily now. The empire was built on lies. We told ourselves we were superior, that we deserved to rule, that other species existed to serve us. But the moment I saw what humanity truly was, what you could have been but chose not to be, I knew those lies would never satisfy me again. He paused. You didn't just defeat the empire. You showed us a better way to exist. Hayes smiled. That was always the plan, not to destroy your people but to free them, including from themselves. Outside the observation deck, the stars burned cold and bright. A galaxy that had known nothing but imperial rule for millennia was learning a different way. It would take time, generations perhaps, for the wounds to fully heal. But for the first time in recorded history, every species in this corner of the universe was free to determine its own future. And at the center of it all, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, 8 billion humans went about their lives. Most of them still didn't fully understand what had happened, how close they had come to slavery, how completely their secret protectors had changed the course of galactic history. They worried about jobs and relationships and politics, about sports teams and entertainment and the weather. But when they looked up at the night sky, they no longer saw an empty void. They saw a neighborhood, vast and strange and full of new friends they were only beginning to meet. They saw possibility instead of threat, wonder instead of fear. And somewhere out there, in the endless dark between stars, a small golden disk drifted on. The humans had recovered their Voyager probe after the liberation, restored it, and sent it back into the void with an updated message. The new recording began with the same greetings of peace, the same hope for friendly contact. But it added something new, an invitation, an offer of friendship and assistance to any species that might find it. A promise that whoever reached out would find not conquerors or exploiters, but partners willing to help them reach for the stars. The Valkorian Empire invaded Earth believing they would find an easy conquest. What they found instead was the end of their civilization, and the beginning of something far greater than any empire could ever be. They found humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same.